Alright, so welcome back to Driveway. Today we got a fun little thing here. If you're not into the whole reasoning why and mathematical type of stuff, then run away. But today I got some exhaust pieces and our weld L's, fittings, whatever you want to call them. So they just fit up real nice. And then it got me to thinking, so you have all these little guys lined up on here, and then you have the tube that it feeds into. And when you're looking around online, there's a lot of people that tell you what size you should run. And I decided I needed to figure out exactly if they were right and put a little math to that concept. So let's just head over to the trouble board here and start crashing out some of these numbers. So yeah, let's go to the board. Alright, so over here on the board we got some figures. Hopefully you can see what I'm looking at. If not, I'll probably have to edit something else in. But you can see up across the top here, this is where we got how many liters a car has, cubic inch, maximum RPM, and then we start getting into CFM, cubic feet per minute. And pretty much how you come up with that is you take your cubic inches times your RPM, then divide by the 3456. That's kind of a constant for this whole rectifying the formula. But in doing so, let's just take the 4.8 that we're working on, for example. It puts out 591 cubic feet per minute, and that would be at 100% efficiency. So that means all the air and fuel that goes in, you get the exact same out, which you're probably never going to reach that. That would be like a maximum best air-fuel ratio, highest compression for what you can get in there. I mean, that would be a top-end screamer. So essentially, a normal engine will have a somewhere in that 0.8 volumetric efficiency. So we take the 0.8 up there times the 591, and that gives us this number here. And then to compensate for the extra air and fuel that a turbo gets, that a pretty decent efficient setup on turbo will give you about a 300% volumetric efficiency, which it sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. So that comes out to this number right here that we'll be using, 1774. And what that reflects is about a horsepower at the flywheel of 820. So that would be probably, I don't know, 650, 700 wheel for a 4.8, which that's about the limit that you really want to go. So essentially, this 1774 here is what we're going to have to use for figuring our pipes and all the dimensions and that type of stuff, because that's how much air is pushed out of that motor. So I'm going to ignore the heat dynamics, because you go from cold air to hot air. there's different densities of air, and that's usually why you just throw on a little percentage one way or another. Like hot gas will take up more volume than cold. So even though you're technically taking in 1774 cubic feet of air through the turbo, what you're pushing out probably is, I don't know, probably closer to that 2000. But anyways, that's kind of beside the point. Now we get into kind of the fun stuff, and that is over here. These are going to be the CFM of certain pipes or tube, whatever you want to call it. So essentially you have a 2-inch diameter pipe, and at 0 psi, that would be your ambient air, it's capable of moving 1438. So essentially on an engine that you have log turbo style exhaust manifolds will feed into either a 2-inch or a 2.5-inch tube pipe, and this kind of backs up the concept that the 1438 times 2, because you'd have one on each side, you have 2,800 cubic feet capable pipe. Now the interesting part is when you introduce a turbo, the reason why you can stay with the same size diameter with a turbo manifold as you would with a standard long tube, even for that matter, some of the long tube headers are even bigger, is when you put the pressure on the compressor side, it creates at least the equal on the turbine side. So just figuring at the 20 psi, which it would probably take to get to that 820 number at the flywheel, that 2-inch pipe is capable of moving 2,500 cubic feet. So then you multiply that by your 2, one for each side, and that's going to be 5,000. Now the big thing to remember in tubes and everything is the length. You'll get drastically different concepts when you deal with short tubes versus longer tubes. Kind of an easy illustration for that is if you just take one of those like coffee stir sticks and then try to blow through it, and then go through a second time and cut off like a 1/4 inch and just blow through that section, there's a drastically difference in what air you can put through. So up here, that was at a 2-foot section, so I'm thinking in terms of a log manifold feeding to the turbine hot side. So we're not talking super long areas. And one thing I didn't put on here is anytime you have a bend, it's going to reduce your CFM. So you kind of have to keep that in mind. If there's going to be a lot of bends in your pipe, you'll probably want to go up a diameter. But in that same thing, you can apply it to if you put an exhaust on a car. So these two here, 15 foot and 10 foot, that would just be a straight tube. So you can tell that a single pipe, 2 inches, so that'd be like an exhaust pipe, only flows 643 CFM. And as you can tell over here, that's well within the capabilities of a stock 4.8. But if you're running something like a 427 7-liter, you're not quite going to be getting it there. So that's where you don't see a lot of single 2-inch tailpipe vehicles. You might see them in some of those Suburbans and everything that are running these 4.8 and 5.3s. So then that's when you end up with going duals. So you can see that you could actually get away with a 10-foot section, straight pipe, no bends. You could have a dual 2-inch and it shouldn't choke out a 427. So of course we still have the expanding gas thing that might throw that off a little bit, but you certainly can get away with that. Now if you have a longer vehicle and you're at this 15 foot, Now you're kind of dropping even further. So that's where people start bumping up to the 2.5 inch. You can see just how astronomical the flow starts getting. The other fun part is when you start introducing X pipes and H pipes, since not all of the cylinders are firing at the exact same time. You can use, like if your side over here is flowing like 1200 and this one's on the other side of the dual is only flowing about 400 due to cycle changes, it can share the CFM between the two. So that's the reason why your X pipes will pick up more power, is probably because the exhaust system is a little bit undersized for what you're doing. And that X pipe and H pipe helps crutch your sizing along. The other fun part to add into the line here is mufflers. So it's like we're still talking on this section over here, duals and the singles. Here's a couple mufflers that I found. A standard Summit muffler, 343 CFM. So it's like even if you have a 2.5 inch exhaust, that the pipes are capable of flowing in that 1,000 for a single, 2,000 for double. This number here, that'll be 686. That's kind of going to be choking you. But if you look at this number right on up here, 692, it's not going to be choking it all that much. So even on a 427 with a somewhat loss of power, you could run those Summits on there. Standard glass pack, 500 cubic foot per. So on a dual that'd be 1,000, well within where you want to be here. Now the other issue you're going to have is if you're running one of these big boys or any of these and you're running the supercharger, that's going to increase your volume of exhaust, but you're not going to have this pressure helping out in between that first line. So down here, you'll be down here and let's just say we're running a LSA 427, making right in here 1,200 horsepower. That'd be about 2,500 cubic foot. You're going to need, if you went single pipe, 10 feet, you need a 3.5 inch. Or you'd want dual 3 inches. So when you see those big Corvettes that are picking up big power by putting on a catback exhaust or even a full exhaust, they're probably going from something like a 2.5 that's only flowing this 2,200, which is really close to the 25. So on a stock like ZR1 or something, it'll work out perfectly fine. But if you put on that bigger pulley, you're now choked out here and you need to step up to the bigger one. It's like all this is a whole bunch of fun figuring out. It's like the cubic foot and the horsepower and the VE. I figured that out. I had two different equations. One took just these, well, one of the equations is right here, cubic foot times RPM divided by the 3456. Then I took another formula that you calculated from the specific fuel consumption. So by going through and doing the same fuel consumption thing, I ended up coming up with this exact same 820. So that lets you know that your equations were correct if you have two completely different equations and you come up with pretty much the identical answer. I mean, you could have a small percentage difference and it'd still be good, but anyways, just for fun, on like the turbo, since we're going to be operating over here, we're going to need at least a 2-inch. But if you go from the one into the double, you know how you usually have that one crossover and it feeds into the back or the front of the other bank, you're going to want to step up to that 2.5. And with that 2.5, you're good for approximately about 1,200 horsepower of flow, give or take. So that's where those people with their rule of thumb that the 2.5-inch log tube headers are good for about 1,000 horsepower, that kind of backs up with a little bit of math. But over here, just for fun, I figured out what a kind of like a light pro mod with a 500 cubic inch motor spinning at 7,500 RPMs, making about 2,000 horsepower. You're going to need to flow 5425. So that's a pretty extreme power level. So that's why you see on the exhaust turbines on the big turbos, why they go up to that 4-inch, because they can't quite make it do with that 3-inch anymore. But anyways, hopefully this sheds a little bit of light on the thought and process behind what everybody says is rule of thumb. So what they do say about 2-inch per side, 2.5 if you have both sides collected, kind of comes out pretty decent, because you'd have two sides would be 2,800 feeding into a single to 25. You're within the same area there. Now the moment you add that 98-degree angle in there or something, you're going to drop it a little bit. So that's where you lose a little bit from this theoretical 1,200 down to what they say about 1,000. So everybody else kind of just throws stuff together and throws it on a dyno and gets their information that way. But you've got this more mathematical approach that makes it so you don't have to waste money. All right, so after all that, where does that exactly leave us? It's pretty much, I've got the rough parts to make the log tube header. I just kind of have to figure out exactly where I'm going to mount everything. And chances are, it's like my initial plan was just have the two collect into the turbo inlet. But I'm finding some size constraints with this wonderful little Crossfire that I'm probably going to have to do a single from one side and feed into the passenger side. So we'll end up with a single crossover, and then that whole thing will feed into a turbo. And yeah, that's pretty much going to leave us to trying to plumb up this little guy over here. So anyways, this will be showcased on another episode. I'm still waiting for the last of the pieces of the bumper stuff that I need. So I guess we'll slowly keep moving on. I've got other parts and things that we can continue, so we're not dragging behind. But again, thanks for watching. Hopefully there'll be a video of building some log tube turbo manifolds here up in coming weeks, and finishing the bumper, doing the rear end, and a bunch of other stuff. So make sure to subscribe, because we've got a lot of progress to make, and we'll just keep plugging away where we can. Well, thanks for stopping by. I guess, yeah, I'll see you guys later.